Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is, wherever in the world it is that you are. Welcome once more to another live stream of Alexandra Mayer's Live. And tonight we will continue my page by page reading and commentary of the modern English version of the Bible. Today we're going into Leviticus 13, the law concerning leprosy. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And as always, I will provide my commentary as I see fit. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a spot, and it turns on the skin of his body like a mark of a leprous sore, then he shall be brought to Aaron, the priest, or to one of his sons, the priest. And the priest shall examine the mark on the skin of the body, and when the hair on the diseased area is white, and the mark appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, then it is a leprous sore. So the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. If the spot is white on the skin of his body, and it appears to be no deeper than the skin, and the hair is not white, then the priest shall isolate the person who has the mark for 7 days. This is interesting. Okay, so apparently there was some sort of virus or illness that was going around amongst the people, and Leviticus 13 basically outlines how to diagnose what the issue is and whether or not it's fatal, whether the person is contagious or not. And they suggest isolation to observe the person. Very interesting. Then the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if the mark is still visible, and the mark has not spread into the skin, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days more. And the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the mark has faded and not spread into the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads in the skin after he has been seen by the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. All right, so the priest also, it seems, acts as a sort of doctor in those days. And if the priest sees that the scab has spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When a person has leprosy, then it shall be reported to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. And if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a recurring leprosy in the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. But he shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. If the leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the disease covers all the skin of the person who has the disease from his head to his feet, wherever the priest looks, then the priest shall examine, and if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean from the disease. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But when raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall see the raw flesh and pronounce him to be unclean. For the raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh turns again, and it is changed to white, then he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall see him. And if the disease is changed to white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. Who has the disease, he is clean. And when the skin has a boil, and it is healed, and in the place of the boil there is a white swelling, or a reddish white spot, then it will be shown to the priest. And if the priest sees it, and it is deeper than the skin, and the hair has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore, that has broken out in the boil. But if the priest looks at it, and there are no white hairs in it, and if it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall isolate the person for 7 days. If it spreads around the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the spot stays in its place and does not spread, then it is the scar of a boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if there is some of the skin on the body where there is a burn, and the raw flesh that has a burn becomes reddish or white spot, becomes a reddish or white spot, then the priest shall examine it. And if the hair in the spot has turned white, and it is deeper than the skin, then it is a leprous disease broken out from the burn. Therefore, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the priest looks at it, and there is no white hair in the spot, and if no deeper than the other skin, and is faded, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And if it has spread around the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. If the spot stays in its place, and it does not spread in the skin, but is faded, then it is a swelling from the burn. And the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on the head or in the beard, then the priest shall examine the sore. And if it is deeper than the skin, and there is in it a yellow thin hair, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scaly leprosy of the head or beard. If the priest examines the scaly sore, and it is no deeper than the skin, then there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the person with the scale for 7 days. This almost sounds like eczema. And on the 7th day, the priest shall examine the sore. And if the scale has not spread, then there is no yellow hair in it, and the scale is not deeper than the skin, then he shall shave. But if the scale is, then he shall shave, but the scale he shall not shave. And the priest shall isolate the person with the scale another 7 days. And on the 7th day, the priest shall examine the scale. If the scale has not spread in the skin, it is no deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale spreads over the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. If the scale has spread over the skin, the priest shall not look for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the scale appears not to have changed, and there is black hair growing in it, then the scale is healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. If a man or a woman has spots on the skin of the body, even white, bright spots, then the priest shall examine. And if the bright spots on the skin of the body are a faded white, then it is just a rash that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. When a man has lost hair from his head, then he is bald. He is still clean. When a man has lost hair from his forehead, then he is bald on the forehead. He is still clean. This is funny to me that hair loss in these days would be viewed as a sickness. But keep in mind, we're still in the Old Testament. But if there is on the bald head or bald forehead a reddish white sore, it is a leprous disease breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine it. If the disease swelling is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, resembling a leprous disease in the skin of the body, he is leprous. He is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. His disease is on his head. The man who has the leprous disease shall have torn clothes and disheveled hair, and he shall cover his mustache and shall cry, unclean, unclean. All the days that he has the disease, he shall be defiled. He is unclean. He shall dwell alone, and he shall live outside the camp. That last part sounds a little bit cruel, in my opinion. Because it's not somebody's fault if they contract a disease, at least not usually. But, I guess it's hard times back in the days of Leviticus 13. Let's continue. The law about leprous garments. If a garment has a leprous disease, whether it is a wool or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or woof of the linen or wool fabric, or in the leather of anything made of leather, and if the disease is greenish or reddish in the garment, or in the leather, or in the warp or woof, or in anything made of leather, it is a leprous disease and shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall examine the disease and isolate the infected article for 7 days. And he shall examine the disease on the 7th day. If the disease has spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in the leather, or in any work that is made of leather, this is a spreading leprous disease. It is unclean. This is interesting. They're talking about whatever this disease is, or this substance maybe, actually living or being on their clothing. I mean, really, I would think if it's on the clothing, they should just burn it. Maybe they didn't have many clothes back then, but still. He shall therefore. Oh well, here we go. I spoke to, or I commentated too soon. He shall therefore burn that garment, whether warp or woof, wool or linen, or anything of leather that has the disease, for it is a spreading leprous disease. It shall be burned in the fire. Yeah, burn it. I mean, this is interesting that they would actually be able to visibly see whatever this sickness is on their clothing, and then it spreads. This is actually kind of frightening. If the priest examines it, and the disease has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or the woof, or anything of leather, then the priest shall command that they wash the article in which the disease appears, and he shall isolate it for 7 days more. So apparently, if this disease or this sickness is isolated for 7 days, it seems to die off, whether it be on the person or on the clothing. At least usually it seems that way, but maybe not. The priest shall examine the infected article after it has been washed. If the infected spot has not changed color, even if the disease has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire. Whether the leprous spot is on the inside or on the outside of the article. If the priest examines and the disease has faded after washing it, he shall tear the spot out of the garment, or out of the leather, or out of the warp or the woof. If it still appears in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or anything of leather, it is spreading. You shall burn in the fire that in which the disease appears. The garment that you have washed, either in the warp or woof, or anything of leather, if the disease is gone from it, then it shall be washed a second time and shall be clean. This is the law of the leprous disease in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or woof, or anything of leather, to determine if it is clean or unclean. Interesting. All right, so that's the end of Leviticus 13. Tomorrow we will go into Leviticus 14, and we'll talk about the law for cleansing lepers. That's how it starts. So I hope all of you have a pleasant evening. I have a few more things I need to do before I go to bed. So take care. Good night.